Hello and welcome to another fantastic Mont Marte art lesson. And today's lesson is going to be fantastic because we're going to be creating this here garden gnome from scratch. So let's get into it. Well, I don't mind telling you, this is very exciting. So the first step we need to do is to create an armature. And one must think of an armature a little bit like a skeleton to hold up our gnome. Now, clay is a very heavy medium, so it needs a support. Now, armatures can be very sophisticated depending on the sculpture. But for a simple work like our gnome, a single point armature like this one will work just perfectly. And this can be made from a number 12 paintbrush and a 5x7 canvas. And this is great because the profile of the stretcher is 38mm by 38mm and it's quite firm. So let's make this armature. The first step is to tear off the wrapping and the canvas. Now when you do this, just be aware that there are staples at the back of the frame. You might like to use a pair of long nose pliers. Once you have your frame, a hole can be drilled in an angle, approximately 30 degrees, but it's not that important. I'm using a hand drill here, and I will say also at this stage, if you are not yet an adult, you might like to get a little help. Once the hole has been created, pull the ferrule out of the brush. This is quite firmly attached, so you will need those pliers again to loosen it. I'm using some Mont Marte PVA craft glue to reinforce the join, but this is optional. Push the brush handle into the frame and bob's your uncle. We have a 1-point armature. Pop it onto an easy clean wood pallet and we're ready for the next step. So let's block in our gnome. Now the clay that I'm going to use is Mont Marte air dry clay in white. And I absolutely love this clay because it's got a very fine texture. It's easy to smooth and it holds unbelievable detail. Now currently Mont Marte carry it in 500 grams and 2 kilogram packets. Obviously you can use tools with this clay, but for this foundation stage I'm going to use my hands, and I absolutely love this stage because it's so immediate and tactile. So let's get some clay on our gnome. Tear off chunks of clay and press it into the void of the frame. Make sure there is no pockets of air and build up the base in a slightly domed shape. This is how easy this product is to smooth. Once it's roughed in, dip your hands in a bit of water and look at that. Using a little bit of pressure, work your hands quickly over the clay. You'll be amazed at how quickly it becomes smooth. So our first step is to create a tube about that long and feed it onto the end of the paintbrush. Press it all the way to the base and ensure that there are no pockets of air between the brush and the clay. About halfway up the column, add a ball of clay about this size and smooth it in. This will be our gnome's belly. And we'll make it a little bit oversized. Don't get too bogged down by details at this stage. Bend this tube at the end and place it in between the base and the belly. This will be our gnome's other leg. A couple of spheres and our gnome has a glutamus maximus. Now smooth off everything. I'm just removing some clay with a fettling knife as I felt the legs were a little thick, even for a gnome. Once you're happy with the shape, you can give it a smooth. This tube here is for 2 arms. 1 arm, 2 arms. Attach the arms from the back of the shoulders and blend them into the pockets of our gnome. Now smooth in the shoulders. I now created an oblong slab about this size. Fashion it a little thinner at one end and then wrap it about 3/4 of the way up the gnome and smooth the thin end into the foundation tube. Well, this stage is completed, so I'm going to wrap it in a damp tea towel and then cling wrap and have a cup of tea. Well, up until now I've just been using a couple of pottery tools and everything's smoothed in, ready for detail. Now for this next section I'll need to use some modelling tools, and I'll be using tools from the mini modelling tool set and the clay tool set. This has 10 pieces, this has 11 pieces, and if you'd like more information, go to montmarte.net, pick out the products and then choose the modelling and sculpture category and you'll find lots of information. So let's start on our little friend's face. If you refer to the PDF, you will find an image of our gnome's face that you can use for reference. I'm using a fettling knife to mark up the position of his beard, as this has a huge bearing on facial feature placement. I use the ribbon tool to remove clay from the eye sockets and then smooth them round. I also cut a channel between the beard and the face. I now create 2 balls for his cheeks, 1 ball for his nose, 2 small balls for his nostrils, 1 ball for the bridge of the nose, and finally 2 balls for the eyes. Once all these elements are in place, I smooth them into the face. I find the modelling tool with an angle on the end is best for this job. Once all the facial elements are blended in, I use a metal-ended tool to cut some eyelids. I then fashion a couple of semicircular shapes and attach them to Mr. Gnome's head in the appropriate spots. He looks quite content. A couple of little shapes above the eyes to suggest eyebrows, and then a long tapered tube under our friend's nose, and he has a moustache. Don't worry if it's a little long, we can trim it if we have to. I then create another semicircular shape and place it on the bottom of the moustache. This will be our gnome's bottom lip. I smooth the tube to the face and then suggest the hair by scoring channels into it. I then do the same with the beard, but cut the tips of each section so it tapers off. After these have been cut, I smooth them off with the modelling tool. Now the head is complete, I switch my attention to Mr. Gnome's rotund body. I mark up the position of the pants with a modelling tool. And I mark the gumboots up as well. To suggest the join, I cut a channel between the shirt and the top of the pants. Once the clay has been removed, I smooth it out. Next, I create a couple of small tubes and wrap them around the legs on the top of each boot. I then leave the bottom of the tube as it is, but blend in the top. I want my gnome to look quite nonchalant, with his hands in his pockets, so I have to cut a channel between the sleeve and the pocket to suggest this. Well, I think we might leave our little gnome friend at that and let him dry. But the last thing we need is a little mushroom. Well, I think our little gnome friend looks pretty great. So we'll leave him at that and let him dry so we can paint him. To paint my gnome, I'll be using Mont Marte Silver Series acrylic paint. And to apply my paint, I'll be using a nice big soft Taklon brush. And these ones are the Mont Marte Gallery series. So let's get this paint on. Well, I hope you enjoyed that, because garden gnomes are just so cool, aren't they? If you do decide to create a garden gnome, you could send us an image. You could send it to montmarte.net and maybe upload it onto our gallery. And while you're there, maybe you'd like to have a look at our blog, join our Facebook, or subscribe to our family feed. Well, it's been great to see you again, and remember, keep on creating art.